Every autumn, the same ritual plays out in neighborhoods across America. Branches gathered into neat piles, leaves raked to the curb, a match struck, flames rising, and within an hour, months of fallen wood reduced to ash and smoke. It feels responsible, tidy, like the proper way to prepare for winter, the final act of a season's cleanup. But what if this simple habit, one we've practiced for generations without question, has been quietly robbing our gardens of nature's greatest gift? Because buried in the science of soil, documented by universities and extension programs across the country, is a truth that changes everything. The wood we burn so casually isn't waste at all. When left to decay properly, a single rotting log becomes one of the most powerful tools for building living soil. It can hold 2 to 5 times its weight in water. Pine wood, once decomposed, swells to nearly 500% of its dry weight. Oak holds 2 to 3 times. That stored moisture becomes available to plant roots for weeks, even months. During drought, scientists describe decayed wood as a 20-year reservoir, a foundation of water, nutrients, and steady warmth that feeds soil long after the work is done. So the question asks itself, if rotting wood is this valuable, if it can sustain gardens for decades without fertilizer or constant watering, why do we burn it? Why treat something nature considers precious as though it were trash? The answer reveals more than a gardening technique. It exposes how deeply we've forgotten to observe what the forest has been teaching all along. Long before researchers began publishing moisture studies, there were people who understood this intuitively. One of them was an Austrian farmer named Sepp Holzer, often called the rebel of the Alps. He watched fallen logs in mountain forests stay moist and warm even in bitter cold. And instead of burning wood like everyone around him, he buried it. What grew from those buried logs challenged everything modern agriculture believed about farming at altitude, about irrigation, about what's possible when you work with nature instead of against it. This is the story of the garden that waters itself, the method that was abandoned not because it failed, but because it didn't fit the machines we invented. And why? As droughts intensify and water becomes precious, we're finally ready to remember what the soil has been trying to tell us. Welcome to Veiled Earth, where we uncover the wisdom buried beneath our feet. The farmer they couldn't stop. Sepp Holzer never set out to become a rebel. He simply wanted to feed his family on steep alpine slopes where conventional wisdom said little could grow, where neighbors accepted that farming meant struggle, constant irrigation, chemical fertilizers, and marginal yields. But Holzer watched the mountains, and what he saw didn't match what he was taught. In the 1960s and 70s, as a young farmer inheriting land at Krameterhof in Austria, he noticed something the textbooks never mentioned. The forest around him thrived without human intervention. Trees grew massive without fertilizer. The ground stayed moist without irrigation. And fallen logs, left to decay naturally, became centers of abundant life. So he started experimenting. Instead of clearing fallen wood like he was supposed to, he buried it deliberately. He created raised beds packed with rotting logs, covered with soil. He dug ponds without permits, carved terraces into slopes, planted fruit trees at altitudes where frost should have killed them. The results were impossible. Lemons growing at 5,000 feet elevation, kiwis ripening beside alpine pines, grapes heavy on vines where neighbors struggled to grow grass, vegetables thriving without a drop of irrigation, even during drought years when valley farms withered. And this abundance came without chemicals, without constant labor, without the endless inputs that conventional farming demanded. The authorities noticed, and they were not pleased. Starting in the 1980s, agricultural inspectors arrived with clipboards and violation notices. Each pond Holzer dug without permission earned a fine. Each terrace built without approval brought another penalty. Every unconventional practice, every departure from standardized methods, resulted in official condemnation. They called his methods reckless. They worried about erosion, flooding, chaos. They demanded he flatten his terraces, drain his ponds, return to approved practices. The fines accumulated. Thousands of Austrian shillings, later euros, dozens of violations annually. By the late 1980s, Holzer had become known as the most fined farmer in Austria. He would later joke in broken English, "I am the most fined farmer," playing on both meanings of the word. In 1989, authorities threatened to seize his farm entirely. The agricultural board had had enough of his defiance, but Holzer's response was simple and devastating. He invited them to measure his yields. What they found silenced the bureaucracy. Holzer's farm produced 10 times more food per acre than conventional neighboring farms. His soil was richer, darker, more alive. His plants were healthier. His water usage was essentially zero. No irrigation systems, no pumps, no wells running dry. The lemons, they said, couldn't grow at that altitude, hung heavy on branches. The kiwis, they insisted, needed warmer climates, ripened perfectly. Vegetables thrived in soil that should have been too poor, too cold, too dry. The evidence was undeniable. Nature, left to its own wisdom and supported rather than fought, could outlast any bureaucracy. The finds continued sporadically, but the threat of seizure evaporated. Holzer kept building, kept planting, kept proving that the old ways, the forest's ways, worked better than modern industrial methods. And at the heart of every success, buried beneath the abundant harvests, were those rotting logs, the wood everyone else burned, the waste that was actually wealth. The soil that remembers. Walk through Holzer's terraces today, and you'll see something that shouldn't exist. Mediterranean abundance in an alpine climate. Citrus trees with glossy leaves heavy with fruit. Kiwi vines climbing beside evergreens. Grapes ripening on slopes where frost comes early and stays late. No hoses snake through these beds. No sprinkler systems tick in the pre-dawn hours. No irrigation lines buried underground. The water comes from within the earth itself, drawn up through roots that tap into hidden reservoirs. The secret is underfoot. Beneath each terrace, beneath every thriving plant, lies wood, logs and branches buried years ago, sometimes decades ago, now transformed into something between solid and soil. Not quite wood anymore, but not yet earth. Something in between, something alive. This in-between state is where the magic happens. As wood decays, its cellular structure transforms. The rigid walls that once made the tree stand tall collapse into a labyrinth of microscopic chambers and tunnels. These spaces pull in water like a sponge, not metaphorically, but physically. Laboratory testing shows that heavily decomposed pine can absorb up to 5 times its dry weight in water. Even dense hardwoods like oak swell to 2 or 3 times their original mass when saturated. This isn't theory. Field measurements taken from hugelkultur beds during the driest months of summer consistently show soil moisture levels of 40 to 60% deep within the mound. Meanwhile, conventional gardens a few feet away register 15 to 20% moisture. The difference between wilting and thriving. When rain falls or snow melts, these buried logs soak it up. Then, slowly, over weeks and months, they release that moisture upward to the roots above. It's a passive irrigation system that recharges itself with every storm and never needs maintenance, never clogs, never breaks. But water is only the beginning. As microbes and fungi break down the wood, the process generates heat. This isn't metaphorical warmth or gentle encouragement, it's measurable thermal energy. Studies in cold climates show that soil above decomposing wood can be 2 to 8 degrees Celsius warmer than surrounding ground. That difference matters profoundly. Seeds germinate earlier in spring when the soil warms faster. Tender seedlings survive late frosts that would kill plants in conventional beds. The growing season extends on both ends, starting earlier, ending later. In Holzer's alpine environment, this extended season means the difference between possible and impossible. Even in winter, when the ground freezes solid elsewhere, the soil above buried wood maintains some warmth. Roots don't go completely dormant. Microbial activity continues at a slow pace. Life persists when it should surrender to cold. Then there's the long game, the legacy effect. Hardwoods like oak and maple can take 15 to 20 years to fully decompose. During that entire time, they release nutrients slowly and steadily: nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, trace minerals, all the elements plants need, delivered in a gentle, continuous stream. This is fundamentally different from synthetic fertilizers, which flood the soil with nutrients all at once, creating boom and bust cycles. Plants gorge, then starve. The soil never stabilizes. Buried wood feeds consistently. The breakdown is gradual. The nutrients are locked in the wood's structure, released only as decomposition progresses. There are no surges, no crashes, just steady nourishment, year after year. And the wood doesn't work alone. As it decays, it becomes a scaffold for an entire underground ecosystem. Fungal networks weave through the softening fibers, forming highways that transport minerals from deep in the mound to surface roots. Beneficial bacteria colonize every crevice, breaking down complex compounds into plant-available forms. Earthworms tunnel through the decomposing wood, mixing it with soil, leaving behind nutrient-rich castings. This living network turns dead wood into dynamic fertility. The mound doesn't just feed plants, it builds soil. Real soil, the kind that takes nature centuries to create, condensed into years. Gardeners who build these beds report the same pattern. The longer the bed exists, the better it performs. First year is good, second year is better. By year 5, the soil is unrecognizable from what was placed there initially. Dark, crumbly, rich with life. It smells like forest floor. It feels springy underfoot. It grows plants with a vigor that shocks people who've gardened conventionally for decades. This is what Holzer understood watching those mountain forests. The logs weren't waste. They were infrastructure, nature's water tanks, heaters, and nutrient banks, all in one. And this infrastructure, once installed, runs automatically for 20 years or more. The science hidden in plain sight. For most of human history, this knowledge wasn't written in journals or taught in universities. It was observed, practiced, passed down through cultures that lived close to forests and understood that death feeds life. That decay is transformation, not ending. But modern science has finally caught up, and the measurements confirm what careful observers always knew. The physics of water retention in decayed wood is elegant. As fungi and bacteria break down lignin and cellulose, the wood's density drops dramatically. A chunk of pine that started dense enough to sink in water becomes light enough to float. Its weight can drop to just 0.18 grams per cc, less than a third of its original density. All that lost mass becomes space, and space in organic material means pore volume, places for water to enter and be held. The more decayed the wood, the more porous it becomes, the more water it can store. Field trials across multiple U.S. states have confirmed this. Washington State University documented moisture retention in wood core raised beds during summer drought. Colorado extension programs measured the same phenomenon. Even in the arid Southwest, gardeners report that beds built over buried logs stay moist while surrounding soil cracks and hardens. The thermal properties are equally well documented. As microbes metabolize organic matter, they generate heat as a byproduct. This exothermic decomposition is continuous. It happens day and night, throughout the year, slowing in winter but never stopping completely. Temperature probes placed in hugelkultur mounds show consistent elevation above ambient soil temperature. The effect is most pronounced during cold months when the differential between decomposing wood and frozen ground can reach significant levels. This passive heating system extends the growing season measurably. Universities in northern climates have documented that wood-based beds allow planting 2 to 3 weeks earlier in spring and harvesting 2 to 3 weeks later in fall compared to conventional beds. For regions with short growing seasons, this can mean the difference between crop success and failure. The nutrient release pattern has been studied extensively as well. As wood breaks down, it releases carbon into the soil, which feeds microbial populations. But initially, this process can temporarily tie up nitrogen as microbes multiply rapidly. This is the well-documented nitrogen dip that occurs in the first year. However, this effect is easily mitigated by adding nitrogen-rich materials at the start: manure, grass clippings, compost, or even urine. Once the microbial population stabilizes, the nutrient release becomes positive and sustained. Long-term studies show that soil amended with buried wood maintains higher levels of nitrogen, phosphorus, and other minerals compared to controls. Even after a decade, tests show elevated nutrient levels in the heart of hugelkultur mounds. Perhaps most importantly, the soil structure improves continuously. The decomposing wood creates aggregates, clusters of soil particles bound together by fungal hyphae and bacterial secretions. These aggregates create air spaces that improve drainage while simultaneously increasing water holding capacity. Better drainage and better retention seem contradictory, but both occur because soil structure becomes more complex. This is soil that breathes, that holds water but doesn't become waterlogged, that feeds roots without drowning them. Every measurement, every field trial, every scientific study of this method confirms the same conclusion. Burying wood transforms soil in ways that synthetic inputs cannot replicate. It's not just about nutrients or water or warmth individually. It's about creating a living system that provides all three simultaneously, automatically, for years. The forest has been running this experiment for 300 million years. We're just finally learning to read the results. The machines that changed everything. If buried wood is so effective, if forests demonstrate its value everywhere we look, why did this practice nearly disappear from agriculture and gardening? The answer isn't complicated, it just isn't flattering. In the early 20th century, farming transformed from a relationship with soil to a relationship with machinery. Tractors arrived, combines, mechanical planters and harvesters. These machines promised speed, efficiency, scalability, and they delivered, but on one condition. The land had to be flat. Machines need uniform surfaces. They need room to turn without obstruction. They need fields without bumps, mounds, or irregularities that could damage equipment or slow progress. A tractor can cover a flat acre in minutes, planting row after row with mechanical precision. But a raised mound packed with buried logs? An obstacle, a problem, a slowdown. So the landscape was reshaped to serve the machines. Hills were graded, mounds were flattened, contours that had held water and built soil for centuries were erased in a season. The question shifted from, what does the soil need, to, what do the machines require? And buried wood didn't fit the answer. Old-growth forests were cleared not just for lumber, but to create empty space. Fallen branches that would have fed the soil for decades were burned because leaving them complicated mechanized operations. The ancient practice of building fertility through decomposition became incompatible with industrial efficiency. This logic spread everywhere. Even home gardeners, who never owned tractors, absorbed the aesthetic. Flat beds felt modern, straight rows felt organized, bare soil felt clean. Burning wood became the proper way to tidy up because it cleared the ground completely. We weren't gardening for the plants anymore. We were gardening for the empty space that machines had taught us to value. But soil doesn't forget, and the consequences accumulated over decades. Without buried organic matter, soil loses its structure. It compacts. It dries out faster, requiring more irrigation. It depletes nutrients faster, requiring more fertilizer. The living ecosystem that thrives in decomposing wood, the fungi, bacteria, earthworms, loses its habitat and diminishes. Across agricultural regions, scientists began documenting what they called soil fatigue. Land that had been productive for generations suddenly struggled. Yields dropped. Inputs increased. Fields that once held moisture through dry spells now cracked and hardened within days of rain. The solution was always more water, more fertilizer, more chemicals. Because the foundation, the slow-building fertility that buried organic matter provides, had been removed. Research programs finally started asking uncomfortable questions. Why did soil health decline so dramatically in industrialized agriculture? What changed? The answer kept pointing back to organic matter, specifically, the woody debris that used to be incorporated into agricultural land but was systematically removed for a century. Studies comparing soils in managed forests versus agricultural fields showed stark differences. Forest soils maintained consistent organic matter levels, held water better, supported greater biodiversity, and remained productive indefinitely. Agricultural soils declined in all these metrics. The difference wasn't mysterious. Forests kept their wood, farms burned it. By the late 20th century, extension programs began cautiously recommending that farmers incorporate organic matter, including wood chips and logs, back into soil. The advice was framed as innovation, as cutting-edge soil science. It wasn't innovation, it was remembering. What Sepp Holzer and others like him had maintained throughout the mechanization era was simply continuity. They never stopped doing what forests do naturally. They never prioritized machinery over soil health. They never abandoned the wisdom that decay feeds life. And now, as industrial agriculture faces ecological limits, depleted aquifers, degraded soil, climate instability, those who kept the old knowledge are no longer rebels. They're teachers. How to build your own water bank. The beauty of this method is its simplicity. You don't need specialized equipment, expensive materials, or advanced training. You need wood, time, and willingness to let nature do most of the work. Start with the foundation, rotting wood, not fresh-cut lumber, but old logs and branches that have already begun to decay. The softer the better. Wood that's been sitting in a pile for a year or two is ideal. If you can push a finger into it, it's ready. Size matters less than you might think. Large logs work beautifully because they hold more water and take longer to decompose. extending the mound's productive life. But smaller branches work too, especially if layered densely. Avoid certain woods entirely. Cedar, black walnut, and any pressure-treated lumber contain compounds that inhibit plant growth. Stick with common hardwoods, oak, maple, ash, birch, and softwoods like pine that are well along in decomposition. The basic construction is straightforward. If you're building a new bed, start by laying logs directly on the ground or in a shallow trench. Arrange them tightly, filling gaps with smaller branches and twigs. You want minimal air pockets. Every gap is a future sinkhole as the wood settles. Next comes the critical layer, nitrogen-rich material. This is not optional. Decomposing wood temporarily pulls nitrogen from surrounding soil as microbes multiply. Without supplemental nitrogen, your first-year plants will yellow and struggle. Add grass clippings, fresh manure, compost, or even kitchen scraps. Some gardeners recommend urine. It's sterile when fresh and extremely nitrogen-rich. Whatever you use, apply it generously. A 2 to 4 inch layer over the entire wood base prevents the nitrogen dip. Then cap everything with soil. A foot of good topsoil works well. This creates the rooting zone where plants will establish. You can add more soil over time as the mound settles, and it will settle as the wood compresses during decomposition. Water thoroughly during the first season. The wood needs time to absorb moisture and begin the decomposition process. Once established, the mound handles its own watering, but that first year requires attention. Shape matters less than you might think. Traditional hugelkultur creates tall mounds, sometimes 3 to 6 feet high. This maximizes surface area and creates microclimates on different sides of the mound. South-facing slopes get more sun and heat. North-facing slopes stay cooler and moister. But low mounds work beautifully too, especially for seniors or anyone with mobility concerns. Even a 6 to 12 inch rise provides the benefits of buried wood without requiring climbing or extensive bending. You can integrate this method into existing raised beds by removing some soil, adding logs at the bottom, and replacing the soil. The bed gets deeper, but the benefits are the same. Timing is flexible. Fall is ideal because you can use all the branches and leaves from seasonal cleanup. Spring works too. Even summer construction succeeds if you water adequately at the start. The mistakes to avoid are few but important. Don't use fresh wood. It takes too long to begin decomposing and provides no benefit for years. Don't skip the nitrogen layer. You'll regret it when plants struggle. Don't use contaminated wood. Treated lumber, painted wood, or anything with chemical residue has no place in food gardens. And don't expect instant perfection. The mound settles, sometimes dramatically. During the first 2 years, plants may struggle initially as the ecosystem establishes. This is normal. By year 3, you'll see the transformation. By year 5, you'll wonder how you ever gardened without it. The investment is time up front, a weekend to build a significant bed, in exchange for 20 years of reduced maintenance. No more daily watering, dramatically less fertilizer, soil that improves rather than depletes. For many gardeners, especially those in their later years, this trade-off is liberation. The garden becomes less work each season, not more. Instead of battling increasing challenges, you work with a system that strengthens over time. The gardens that remember. The proof lives not in theory but in soil. In gardens that have been running this experiment for years, sometimes decades. A retired teacher in Oregon built her first hugelkultur bed in 2015 using storm-felled maple logs. She packed every gap with grass clippings and horse manure, capped it with a foot of topsoil, and planted tomatoes, squash, and beans. The first year was promising. The second year was remarkable. By year 3, she put her hose away. The bed stayed moist through the entire summer without supplemental watering. She monitored it closely, certain it would dry out eventually. It never did. Her water bill dropped so dramatically that the utility company sent a notice asking if her meter was broken. It wasn't. She simply wasn't watering her garden anymore because the garden was watering itself. By year 5, the soil had transformed. What started as decent topsoil had become dark, crumbly, rich with earthworms and fungal networks. She described it as forest floor quality, the kind of soil you find under old growth trees, not in suburban backyards. Her harvest increased every season. The same plot that once produced moderately now yields abundantly, and she does less work each year, not more. A suburban homeowner in Colorado turned last year's brush pile into a serpentine bed winding through his backyard. He tracked every expense meticulously, curious about the true cost savings. First-year investment. A weekend of labor and $0 for materials. Everything came from his property or neighbor's yard waste. First-year savings. $340 in fertilizer he didn't buy and water costs he didn't incur. By year 2, his harvest had doubled. He calculated that the produce value alone exceeded $800. From a bed that required almost no maintenance, no fertilizer purchases, minimal watering, just occasional mulching with autumn leaves. His return on investment, measured purely financially, exceeded 400% in 2 years. Measured in food security, soil health, and reduced labor, it was incalculable. Not every story begins with success. A permaculture enthusiast in New Mexico built her bed correctly except for one detail. She skipped the nitrogen layer. She'd read about it but decided the wood alone would be sufficient. Her seedlings yellowed within weeks. Growth stalled. Plants that should have thrived struggled to survive. She knew something was wrong but couldn't identify the problem until she consulted with experienced hugelkultur gardeners. The diagnosis was immediate: nitrogen lockup. The microbes decomposing the wood were pulling all available nitrogen from the soil, leaving nothing for the plants. The solution was simple. She side-dressed with compost and fresh grass clippings, working them into the top layer of the bed. Within 2 weeks, the plants responded. New growth emerged, dark green and vigorous. By season's end, the bed had recovered completely. Her mistake became her most valuable lesson, and the following year, her bed outperformed everything else in her garden. These patterns repeat across climate zones, soil types, and gardener experience levels. The method works in Pacific Northwest rain, Colorado altitude, Arizona heat, and Midwestern humidity. It works for experienced permaculturists and complete beginners. The common thread is patience. Those who build these beds expecting instant perfection often feel disappointed. Those who build them understanding it's a 3 to 5 year investment until full maturity report profound satisfaction. Because by year 5, you're not just gardening differently, you're gardening easier, with soil that's alive in ways conventional gardens never achieve, with water retention that makes drought manageable, with fertility that builds rather than depletes. The garden remembers what you buried, and it gives back far more than you put in. The future already growing. We stand at an inflection point. Climate patterns are shifting. Droughts lengthen and intensify. Water becomes scarce and expensive. The industrial food system, built on endless irrigation and chemical inputs, strains against ecological limits it can no longer ignore. And quietly, in backyards and small farms across the country, people are remembering what forests never forgot. Every buried log is a small act of resistance against a system that demands dependence. Against the idea that fertility must be purchased annually, that water must flow constantly, that soil depletes unless repeatedly injected with synthetic inputs. Buried wood proves something dangerous to that system. Soil can build itself. Water can be stored naturally. Fertility can accumulate over decades without external inputs. This isn't radical. It's remembering. It's observing what nature demonstrates everywhere we look and asking the simple question: why not copy what works? Sepp Holzer didn't invent this method. Forests have been practicing it for 300 million years. He just refused to forget when everyone around him was taught that progress meant abandoning natural patterns in favor of mechanized efficiency. And now, as those mechanical systems falter under ecological pressure, the old knowledge becomes new again. Except it was never old. It was just ignored. Research programs now study hugelkultur as innovative soil technology. Extension services recommend it for water conservation. Universities document its benefits in peer-reviewed papers. This rebranding as innovation is simultaneously amusing and hopeful. Amusing because it demonstrates how completely we forgot what was once common knowledge. Hopeful because it means institutional support is building for practices that actually work. As water becomes precious, as topsoil depletes, as conventional agriculture faces the consequences of a century of extraction, methods like this stop being alternative and become essential. Every gardener who buries wood instead of burning it creates a small reservoir that matters. Multiply that by thousands, then millions, and the impact becomes measurable, not just in individual gardens, but in aquifer recharge, in carbon sequestration, in living soil that resists erosion and supports biodiversity. This is how change happens, not through top-down mandates, but through quiet adoption of practices that work better, through gardens that prove, year after year, that nature's way is more resilient than human engineering. The future isn't about inventing new technologies to save us. It's about remembering the technologies that were always there, waiting for us to stop burning them and start burying them instead. What will your soil remember? There's a question worth asking as we close this chapter, not about technique or science, but about legacy. 20 years from now, what will your garden hold? Will it hold the memory of burnt branches and lost potential? The remains of seasons where abundance was turned to ash because that's what everyone did? Or will it cradle layers of living soil, dark and rich, fed by wood that's been slowly transforming beneath the surface for 2 decades? One choice disappears in a moment, the other compounds over time. This is the gift of buried wood. It's not quick, it's not flashy, it won't give you instant results you can photograph and share. But it gives you something better. It gives you time. It works while you sleep, while you're away, while you age and find the heavy work harder each year. It builds when you can't. It stores water you'll need next summer. It feeds soil that will feed you for years to come. For those of us who've gardened long enough to see seasons turn to decades, who've watched gardens mature and soil evolve, this method speaks to something deeper than efficiency. It speaks to the kind of gardening that acknowledges we won't always be here to tend these beds, that the work we do today becomes part of something larger than a single harvest. When you bury wood, you're not just gardening, you're creating infrastructure that outlasts your ability to maintain it. You're building soil that will feed someone else someday, even if that someone is just the birds and earthworms that inherit the space. This is gardening as an act of faith, faith that the slow processes matter more than the quick fixes, that nature's timeline is wiser than our impatience, that decay is transformation, not ending. The forest teaches this if we're willing to watch. Every fallen tree becomes a nursery for the next generation. Every rotting log feeds the soil that feeds the seedlings that become the canopy that drops the next generation of logs. It's a cycle that requires nothing from us except our willingness not to interrupt it. So maybe the real question isn't whether buried wood works. The science answers that clearly. The gardens demonstrate it undeniably. The real question is whether we're ready to trust what we observe, whether we're willing to work with nature's timeline instead of against it, whether we can value the slow accumulation of fertility over the instant gratification of purchased inputs. Your garden will remember what you give it. Every buried log is a memory stored in soil. Every season that wood breaks down is a year of sustained giving. What legacy will you leave in the ground? This is veiled earth, where we remember what was forgotten and rediscover what was always there. If this story reminded you of something your grandparents knew, or inspired you to try something new, or simply made you look at a fallen branch differently, then share it, not for algorithms, but because this knowledge survives through sharing. The next chapter opens soon. Until then, may your soil be rich, your water abundant, and your garden a place of patient transformation. Subscribe, and remember, the best time to bury wood was 20 years ago. The second best time is today.